The News Day continues here on One News Now Business. I'm Danny Laurel. Here are the biggest stories on the economic and corporate fronts. The law allowing full foreign ownership and more public services will take effect in April. That's according to the National Economic Development Authority, or the NEDA. This after NEDA released the implementing rules and regulations for the amended Public Service Act, or the PSA. This law allows full foreign ownership in telecommunications, railways and subways, airlines, expressways and tollways, as well as airports, effective April 4th. Now, these sectors were previously subject to the 40% foreign ownership cap for public utilities. Other public service utilities such as electricity transmission and distribution, as well as wastewater pipeline distribution systems, are still subject to the 40% foreign equity limit. The economy likely expanded by 7.1% in the first quarter. That's according to First Metro Investment Corporation and the University of Asia and the Pacific. FMIC and the UANP said this is buoyed by personal income tax cuts and the robust OFW remittances, which should prove sufficient to boost business and consumer confidence. Personal income tax cuts under the Train Law took effect this year, while cash remittances rose by 3.5% to $2.76 billion in January. The government has set its growth target to 6 to 7% this year, citing post-pandemic mobility, but still slower than the 7.6% expansion seen in 2022. Now, the bill, which seeks to establish the Maharlika Investment Fund, has reached the Senate plenary. Senator Mark Villar, who sits as the chairman of the Committee on Banks, says the bill has potential to bring the country back to high trajectory growth. Villar also says a sovereign wealth fund would help accomplish infrastructure projects faster. The senator also says the committee has removed privileges and tax exemptions from the originally filed bill. A joint congressional oversight committee comprised of 5 members each from the Senate and the House will also be formed to tackle this bill.
Not only will this promote the effective intergenerational management of the country's financial resources, but more importantly, improve the welfare of future generations of Filipinos. The Maharlika Investment Fund has the potential to attract foreign investments, boost national savings, and advance economic growth for Filipinos across generations.
The Bangko Sentral has reiterated that the local banking industry remains strong and is ready to withstand possible shocks arising from the collapse of some U.S. banks. The BSP made this assurance to a note sent to President Bongbong Marcos. The Bangko Sentral said Philippine banks have, quote, an asset base that significantly differs from that of U.S. banks. Financial markets across the world have been on the edge following the fallout of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank over in the United States. A confidence crisis also hit Switzerland's Credit Suisse, resulting in a state-orchestrated emergency rescue by its rival UBS. The Bangko Sentral said they will continue to closely monitor these developments and will assess their impact on the banking system. And over in Europe, European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde tells the European Parliament that EU banks have limited exposure to Credit Suisse. Let's listen in.
On the assessment of exposures, in particular of the euro area banks to the Credit Suisse risk, this is a question that you will be better addressed to Mr. Enria tomorrow. But it's not that I'm completely uninterested in the matter. So I did ask my staff to actually investigate this issue, and the feedback and the assessment that has been produced indicates that it's a very limited exposure to Credit Suisse, particularly in relation to the AT1s. Very limited. We're not talking billions; we're talking millions here. I just want to remind you that the decision that was taken by the Swiss authorities yesterday was taken under Swiss law and on the basis of the contractual agreements that had been undertaken by those Swiss entities, namely the contractual terms of the AT1s. And as I said earlier, Switzerland does not set standards for the European Union. the standards in the European Union are set by your Parliament, by regulations, by directives, by frameworks that have their own principles and their own rules. And I would simply like to refer you to the statement that was published earlier today by the Single Resolution Board, the European Banking Authority, and the ECB Banking Supervision that welcomed the comprehensive set of action taken yesterday by the Swiss authorities. But they also indicated, and I think that's the most important part of their statement, the resolution framework implementing in the European Union the reforms recommended by the Financial Stability Board after the great financial crisis has established, among others, the order according to which shareholders and creditors of a troubled bank should bear losses. In particular, common equity instruments are the first ones to absorb losses, and only after their full use would additional Tier 1, those famous 81s, be required to be written down, not the other way around. This approach has been consistently applied in past cases and will continue to guide the actions of the SRB and ECB banking supervision in crisis intervention. I think it's very clear the pecking order is what is provided for under the existing European regulations.
And beneath all the turmoil, global investors still express confidence in the Federal Reserve and the U.S. economy. Scarlett Fu shares the findings from Bloomberg's latest survey of investors.
When you look at the stock and bond market, the recent big swings might signal fears of a global financial crisis 2.0. Yet, beneath all that turmoil, investors still express confidence in the U.S. economy. And by extension, confidence in the Federal Reserve's ability to tackle inflation. A Bloomberg survey of professional and retail investors finds that 2/3 of them still believe in the Fed, and that even after the collapse of 3 regional banks led the government to announce emergency measures to support the industry, 90% of respondents expect the Fed to keep raising interest rates. Most economists now expect at most a modest hike of 0.25 percentage point in March, after the failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, the rescues of First Republic and Credit Suisse raised financial stability concerns. What we've seen is an entire year's worth of non-stop rate hikes weakening the U.S. jobs market, with job growth slowing down. But only 1/3 of respondents expect that decline to trigger a recession, in part because a shortage of workers will provide support to the job market. However the Fed proceeds, it'll take time to truly feel the impact. About half of market watchers estimate it takes 3 to 9 months to see the real-world effects. A third believes the impact is felt 9 to 12 months later, like we've seen with the collapse in those regional banks.
And we'll be back with more stories after the break. Keep it here on One News. You're still watching One News Now Business. I'm Dani Laurel. Meralco has accepted offers to partially replace the 670 megawatts of lost capacity under a terminated deal with SMC Global Power. Business World quoted Meralco First Vice President Jose Ronald Valles as saying that they are now in the process of finalizing the agreements. According to Valles, Meralco has received an offer from GN Power Dingingin for 300 megawatts, which is only for 1 year. The capacity was supposed to be delivered by SMC Global Power Unit South Premier Power Corp under a PSA with Meralco that was agreed upon in 2019. The 10-year deal was indefinitely suspended after the Court of Appeals granted an injunction sought by the power arm of SMC. Amazon is laying off 9,000 more employees, adding to cuts that were already part of the largest round of firings in the company's history. Human resources expert Cara Brennan explains the impact of layoffs so far here on Bloomberg TV. Let's listen in.
What is your assessment of the level of layoffs that we're seeing right now in this technology industry?
You know, as mentioned, we all know the rational thought here is that this is similar to what happened a few years ago. Technically, it should be perceived as a drop in the bucket compared to the total employment that we have here in Silicon Valley and in our tech companies overall. But man, it sure doesn't feel that way. After the weeks that we've had recently with Silicon Valley Bank, now First Republic Bank, we at Lattice and our 5,000 customers are having a lot of conversations about how to keep employees engaged, how to keep morale at a functional level while everyone's facing these challenges.
Caroline, we should point out that these layoffs, this latest round, won't happen until mid-April. And if there will be separation packages, of course. But morale right now, what I'm hearing, at least within Meta, I'm sure in Amazon as well, is low.
Yeah, and Meta, I'm sure now at Amazon, the feeling that it's not going to be happening overnight. You are a people-driven business at Lattice. Cara, what could be being done differently, do you think, in terms of communication?
So much of this is about proactive communication as much as it is about reactive. And you saw in Jassy's memo that he's talking about trying to contain this conversation within the context of the larger planning for the organization, trying to double down on the thoughtfulness that came with these decisions around the job cuts. What we know from being on the ground is that we have a number of organizations where people don't understand why the cuts were made where they were. We know on the HR side that it makes sense during these times to cut recruiters, to cut some other administrative functions. We're learning more about what's happening on the cloud side of the businesses within Amazon. But that's the real question. People want to understand, why are these decisions made? Why was I affected? Why was my coworker affected? And that's what our companies are asking for information about. How do we proactively communicate so we don't create more noise than necessary?
And when you're a chief people officer of a company like Lattice, is it reality that then there's a lot of talent that you could hire up if you were in that stage? I know a lot of companies aren't. Or are people, when they're not being laid off till April, till May, when does that actually become a reality, this talent that suddenly people can get for perhaps a little cheaper than previously?
On the chief people officer side, there's definitely conversations within our networks about what will the impact of this be in the broader marketplace. And we are starting to see the impact of the layoffs that were happening in the fall, and it's probably going to be at least a quarter post layoff before we'll see these people ready to turn back into the market and look for their next jobs. We are challenged with really wonderful exit packages from a lot of these companies when you're trying to rehire these folks quickly. But I'll tell you, as a chief people officer and someone who really cares about that side of the business, I'll take that any day.
Meanwhile, the Philippine government is set to sell smuggled sugar in Kadiwa stores. The Sugar Regulatory Administration confirms that it has received a memorandum from the palace green-lighting the scheme. The government aims to sell smuggled sugar at around 70 pesos per kilo.
The
if it remains in the BOC, the only options there are for it to be destroyed or for it to be auctioned. Yung usual kasi nangyayari, pag in-auction natin, yung importer din bumibili ulit. Now, at least, it will be felt by the consumer. Kasi bibenta na po nila Asec Christine sa Kadiwa.
Now, as of late, sugar has been selling for up to 110 pesos per kilo in retail stores. However, this is seen to go down to 85 to 90 pesos upon the distribution of imported sugar. Stakeholders now seek the distribution of 20,000 metric tons of sugar from the 60,000 metric tons imported since February. However, the SRA says it is unsure if the imported supply has reached local markets. Under Sugar Order Number 6, up to 440,000 metric tons of sugar is authorized for importation. And those are the top business stories of the hour. I'm Danny Laurel. Join us again at 2 p.m. We are One News, all sides, all the time.